Assembly of First Nations National Chief Perry Bellegarde is now calling for the suspension of the RCMP officer who tackled Athabasca Chipewyan First Nation Chief Allan during a violent arrest in March over expired license plates. Well, this comes after charges were dropped on Wednesday against Adam resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. Chief Allan joins us this morning from Fort McMurray. Welcome.
Hello.
Now that the charges against you have been dropped, are you satisfied that justice has been served?
I could move on with my life now and carry on my duties as elected representative of my nation.
Yeah, we should point out that you have been chief since 2003, almost 20 years. I want to bring up the photo. It's good to see your face, by the way, because the images that I've been seeing have been ones like this. This is taken after that arrest. This photo, along with videos, were released in a press conference to show the injuries that you sustained during your arrest. Now, the police viewed that video. They deemed the actions were reasonable and no charges against any of the officer, no investigation happened. But it's not until the videos and the photo were released that even the Prime Minister weighed in. I'm curious to know what you think would have happened had there been no video.
We probably would have went to trial and, you know, it all would have came out in the media and stuff like that. But then even if there was no video, there was enough evidence and there was enough witnesses around to see what the RCMP had done to me that night.
Somebody has pointed out that the fact that the arrest went down that way in full view of people who were recording it says something about how emboldened certain officers might feel when dealing with an Indigenous person.
I think in some ways that the RCMP have systemic racial issues all the way back since the RCMP were formed, and they never, ever removed that from their organization. And you got to remember that the stories that were told from residential schools is that the kids were taken away from their families and put in those institutions. So the horrific things that carry on in the past is a new form of residential school today, is that as soon as you see a Native person, pick them up and get them charged and fill up the incarceration units.
You yourself are a survivor of residential schools. That officer that we're talking about, Officer Sagan, is still employed as of today, even though he is now facing an investigation and charges in another case. What does this tell us about how police view violent acts against Indigenous people?
It just goes to show that the cover-up that goes on within the organization, and for them to, what you would say, assaulting someone would be just another daily norm for the RCMP, because that's what they're known for, and you know, they just don't have any remorse for Canadian citizens, especially Aboriginal people and African Americans alike.
Chief Adam, in a press conference this week, one of the changes that you called for was setting up Indigenous police forces. How would that operate? What would that look like? This has come up before, and the question is, you know, what happens with charges and sentencing? Where would people serve out something if they were found to be guilty? How would Indigenous policing work?
Indigenous policing would have to coexist with the province. They would have to set up a system in regards to how it's going to work. If not, it has to come from the federal side, you know, from Canada. But the fact remains that if we're going to set up a policing system, it has to be funded properly. You know, and people talk about defunding the police organization. Well, then if you're going to defund the police organization, you might as well start taking some of that defunding and move it over to an Aboriginal-based police organization, because that's what's going to have to require. You can't have an Aboriginal base just from a community standpoint. You have to have an organization of a force that will circulate its force members around within the treaty-respected areas that they represent.
Chief Adam, what happened to you is not an isolated incident. We know that in this country there have been reviews and commissions in almost every province when it comes to interactions between the RCMP and Indigenous people. What do you think it will take to get to a place where Indigenous community can trust police in this country?
I think when it gets to that place right there, that would have to be a police, Aboriginal police run organization. You got to remember that throughout the history of the RCMP and First Nations communities, there was a lot of violence that took place, and a lot of young people, I myself even witnessed it as a young person, about the violence that the RCMP carried out when they made arrests in the community. So those things still exist today, and it's getting more violent as you see. Like you look at the young guy that was arrested in Nunavut, was hit with a police vehicle. And yet there was 5 RCMP officers that attacked him. For what? I don't understand the meaning of police force when it's one individual who couldn't even walk. I think even you yourself would probably put one finger on him and he probably would have just fell over.
Chief Allan Adam, we're going to have to leave our conversation there. Great to have you here on Your Morning. Thank you for joining us today, and we wish you well. Glad to see that you're on the mend.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you like this, be sure to subscribe here.
And you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.